The Pearl of Great Price Lecture Series, given by Dr. Hugh Nibley. Today's lecture is entitled, The Council According to the Shabako Stone.
And this is the way Breasted begins his article. I put 4 or 5 copies on reserve. You can get it. It's short. Get a Xerox yourself, for that matter. He opens his article. During a sojourn in the British Museum, it was the writer's good fortune to subject to close scrutiny an ancient stone, the importance of which has hitherto been entirely unsuspected. Well, everybody suspected it might be important, but they couldn't make heads or tails of it. That's the trouble. It contains the oldest known philological explanation of the world, written 1,000 years before the first Greek philosopher was born. Well, he was wrong there. It was written 1,000 years before that, at least. Written 2,000 years, 3,000 years before the first philosopher was born. In other words, there were other people philosophizing too. You would find this around. See, the archaic world has disappeared completely, and the marvelous thing is that this has been able to survive, and he tells us how it happened. Each new capital, every time they founded a new dynasty, they would do the same thing, renew the theology, give a new version of the creation story. It was done at Heliopolis. Then Menes did it at Memphis. That's this text here. Then Amenemnes did it in the Middle Kingdom at Dashur. Then Amenos IV, King did it at Elamarna. Then the Muslims did it at Cairo, always with the new center and the new theology, but they always follow along the same line. But this is what he wanted to do. I said he was going to renew it, so we went back to the old temple that was built for the first to celebrate the founding of the first dynasty in Egypt, beginning of civilization, 3200 BC. And it was very old then, he finds out. Epigraphically, orthographically, vocabulary, and syntax all put it before the pyramid text, and the pyramid text, the oldest book in the world. They go back, they're all before 2000. but they go way back right to the pyramids. Pyramid texts are found under the pyramids, written on the walls, beautifully carved and so forth. But they're very old. They go back to 2800, 2900 BC. And this is older than that, the grammar. So I say this is proof epigraphically. What do you mean by epigraphically? By the way it's carved on the rock, the order, the columns, the way they're divided and so forth. It's the quaint, the old-fashioned way. They never did it later on. It was never used after, say, the 11th dynasty. So it puts it very old. Then orthographically, the way they spelled things. They used the old archaic spellings. Very, very quaint spellings. Well, those of you who are in English know the difference between Middle English and West Saxon and Northumbrian and modern and medieval English. Well, medieval is Middle English. But you recognize immediately what particular period it came from, though they'll be using the same words. It was the same thing here. And the syntax, that's the order in which the words occur. That is peculiar to the times. And everything puts it before the pyramid text. So, very, very old. The oldest parts, they're very old parts, they are the dialogues of the gods here. Now, we come to this, and this is the doctrine, this is the theology of the creation, I guess. Would be clear if it's brought more, over here, because that's where it is. We'll put it up that way, yeah. Notice these three are met together. Now we're going to get the theology, and this is why they couldn't read it, because it is written backwards. It should read this way, you see, by the direction the figures are facing, but actually it's read this way, which Breasted discovered. The Netzru Heper Em Ptah. These are the forms that Ptah bestowed upon all life and so forth. How Ptah extended himself and was able to put his life and his nature and his stamp upon all that was created. The gods, Heperu, the gods who came into existence in, as, or through Ptah. And first of all, there is Ptah, there set where? Ptah upon the great throne. He's the first Ptah. These are different Ptahs, you see. Then there is Ptah Nun, the heavenly Ptah. Incidentally, he's standing in the temple, in the shrine of the temple of the south here. Temple, who is the father of Atom. Then there is Ptah Naunet, who is the mother of Atom, who is the mother who bore Atom. And then there is the great Ptah, who is the heart and the mind, who is the mind and the lips and the tongue, Pao, of the Pesaget of all the gods, whose mind and heart are in all the gods. But so it happened, you see, it happened in the mind and heart. That's the hut, you see. Hut, same word as our word head, front, and so forth. And there's a picture of a heart. In the heart and upon the tongue, that the form, the yichi, is, remember that's the same word for image, likeness. That the image and likeness of Ta was in Tem. See, through the mind, the might and the heart of tongue, established his image in Atom. You were great and mighty is Ta. It's the creation. This incident is great and mighty is Ta. When he creates something, then everybody breaks out into the creation hymn, which is a very important hymn. Our word poetry comes from that, poem. As Walter Otto showed, poema, well, you know what the Greek word poema is to make. The making means creation. It's the creation hymn. It was first sung by the Muses to celebrate the creation. Remember, when the plan of creation was decided on and everything was passed, then the morning stars shine, the sons of God sang together, the morning stars sang together, and the sons of God shouted for joy. That's the creation hymn. We often find a reference to it, to hail God for his greatness, and rejoicing, overwhelmed with joy and exaltation at the thought of this new creation of a new world coming into existence. That's what happened. His mind was imparted. His image is in Tem. Great and mighty is Ta, and they acclaim him. And because through Atom, it says, it came to all the spirits, the cosmos, to all their spirits as well. Sek, that's a very archaic word for sek. Not only to Atom, but to all other spirits as well did Ta bestow being. Het in his heart and in the mind, in the heart and in the tongue. And then we say heart and mind because they're the same. And then, again it divides. Then, this isn't Keper, but this is Keper N. And it came to pass that Horus and Jehuti and Thoth were cooperated with him. There were three are going to operate then. There is Ta, you notice, Geb waits down below to take things over. Tem, Atom, is the one who transmits the seed. But at the creation, these three made the main council: Ta, Horus, and Jehuti, Thoth, who, as you know, is Hermes, the secretary of the gods, the spirit, the revealer, the one who keeps all the records, the one who has all knowledge. He's the god of knowledge, the god of wisdom, the god of counsel. He's always rendered in the Greeks by Hermes, so that's where you get Hermetism, the source of all wisdom and so forth. So these three, and of course Horus is the sun. He's always the sun. Horus the sun, and Jehuti, who is represented in the abstract, well, so is Horus for that matter, by the ibis. And we're in him, in Ta. Notice, they came into existence, they were Emta, with Ta. They cooperated with Ta in all this. And the authority, Sechem, and that's Sechem, a very common word. You get it in the names of kings, Sekhemwi and so forth out here in the museum. It means might, power, authority, usually rendered as authority. And authority, might, and power of the heart and of the tongue were in what he did. And this, again, is something that's been restored on the document. See, this is way back, was made in 1901. This is the one that yes, it's in the 39th volume of the AZ, of the Historische Zeitschrift, and it's breasted. And since then, they made a couple of corrections, and this is one of them. It is the doctrine, it is the teaching that there should be a B there. Sebun is the teach when it epim that he is, that Ta is, Kenet, that he enters into, that he, well, Kenet is to stand in front, to confront, to stand in front of, to be joined with, to be as close as you can, possibly his presidency and so forth, that he is in every body, that's the physical body, the cat, and in every mouth, Neb, of every god, of all human beings, of all gods, you see, of all human beings, there's male and female human beings, of all Awit, that's cattle, you see there's a cattle hook, and there's supposed to be a piece of skin with a tail on it. This is all cattle, all creeping things. No, this is a classification of life on earth. Of all gods, of all men, of all cattle, of all Keftu, notice there's a serpent, of all creeping things, of all Keftu, and all other forms of life, anahu. Herkat in the Herkat, Her Sejaman, which according to the plan, the plan, finger stop, according to the plan and according to the order. It was planned and it was ordained, you see. It uses this throughout the book of Abraham, you notice. It says they planned and then they saw that their commands would be obeyed. And that they both planned and then they ordered. They would plan and then they would give their orders and the orders would be followed. And that's what this talks about. According to the plan and according to what was planned, that's tell, that's probably a passive, I'll tell, hair, and according to that which was ket nebet, everything which was ordained, planned, ordained, and commanded, according to his good pleasure. And everything merit as taught these. It was all according to his pleasure. Now so we have the heart and the tongue acting here, and this is very important because remember we read here, not by heart in the 4th chapter, he says in Moses at the beginning he talks about the creation, and this is very important because this is the famous Logos theology that baffles everybody, and there's no need to be baffled because it's wonderfully clear in the book of Moses 1 and 4. The Logos, that's the word, you see. Logos. Remember, the book of John starts out in arche, ein o logos. In the beginning, in the arche, remember we said the top 100 nomos reus to begin with, was the Logos. Discussion, counsel, word, can mean all those things, reason, mean everything you want. And the book of Genesis begins the same way. They say this, they always refer this to Genesis and John. Genesis begins in the beginning. But that begins Bereshit, which as Joseph Smith says, in the council of the gods. That's what it was. At the beginning they call out the council.
Matter and space has always been around. That was not created. That always existed. Infinity always existed. That was not born. That was in the waters of Nun. Darkness and light, always in existence. The invisible, always in existence. But what did it need? It needed to be called into existence by the creative word, which is Atum. Atum is the creative word, the essence that brings things into being. So that's why you have Nun, but Nun, Bata, Atum, the Nun didn't have a name. Nun was the grand unified theory. It was what existed before existence existed. You know, what was before was. So that Nun didn't have a name. It needed to create an essence that would know its name. So Nun, through Nun came Ptah, through Ptah came Atum, and Atum was the mouth that called Nun into being. The second philosophy says that Atum, because you're continuing from the first philosophy to the second philosophy says that Atum calls into being 4 pairs. Those 4 pairs are Nun, Nunet, Ha, Hahet, Kak, Kaket, Amun, Amunet. Nun is waters or matter. Nunet is space or the heavens. Ha is infinity. Hahet is finity. Kak is darkness. Kaket is light. Amen is the invisible. And Amunet is the visible. These are known as the Neterenu, the uncreated creations. And as we spoke about in the lecture last night, think about what was on the mind of the person who thought about it. How could you depict a person who was already there, was never created, and what they decided is that these are the only 8 essences or natures that do not have belly buttons. They are called without belly buttons because without a belly button, it means that you did not have an umbilical cord. It means umbilical cord was not connected to a mother, which means mother never gave birth to you. You were always in existence. I'd like to talk to the mind that thought that up. Kepler, the process of becoming, comes out of the second philosophy, and Atum Kepler now creates Shu, male, air or space. Tefnut is his wife, moisture. Shu Tefnut. Now we're talking science. Air and moisture gives birth to Nut and Geb. Nut is female, Geb is male. Nut is sky, Geb is earth. Shu Tefnut give birth. So now you have a creation where opposites are now creating things into existence as opposed to the already created. Shu Tefnut give birth to Nut and Geb. The story goes that Nut and Geb are in a lover's embrace. In other words, they are cohabiting. Shu comes down and separates Nut from Geb. Look at science. At one time on the earth hovered around a very strong carboniferous age that did not allow the cycle to, the carbon, oxygen cycle, nitrogen cycle to exist. So what happened? Air came down and brought the sky up, and then allowed Nut swallows the sun at night, gives birth to it during the day, which started a 24-day cycle on the planet that allowed light and heat energy to come down to the earth, mix with the nitrogen of Geb, and then create organic life in the waters. Because it started with that one amoeba, if you want to call it, protozoa, if you want to call it, in the waters. That unicell started to multiply itself, giving off the same stories being told for the third time, but now in another way. So the Dogon had two stories, two creation stories. The Kemites had two creation stories. This is the second creation story, the same as the Dogon with Numo Amma. So now you have this, the sky lifting up. To the Kemites, Native American history and culture. Part of my family's Native American culture in America. I've been told the story of Mother Earth and Father Sky. But to the Kemites, it was Father Earth and Mother Sky. And so we are not earthlings, we are starlings. We are children of the sun. We are bits and pieces of the light and heat energy of the sun encapsulated in this tomb. And upon death, joining the ancestors, we are released. And everything we do in life determines that. Here is the story. The mummy. When you see the mummy, you always know both legs are together and the crossing over sign, okay? What animal, what entity on the earth would look like a mummy? It's the chrysalis, or the cocoon. The caterpillar, who lives a life on earth, earthbound. And its entire life, its purpose is to eat the proper leaves. When it eats the proper leaves, it can spin a proper cocoon. If it don't eat the proper leaves, if it's a bad season, it cannot spin the cocoon, and it will die in state as an earthbound caterpillar. When it eats the proper ones, it can spin a cocoon. And in this cocoon, the butterfly literally melts and transforms itself into a butterfly. When the cocoon opens, what was once earthbound becomes flightbound and no longer eat leaves, but now eats the nectar of the flower. Think of the metaphor that our ancestors were talking about as it related to the mummy, to the Sa, that when you died, you were earthbound and you walked the earth. And just like caterpillar eat leaf, we get consciousness. We eat books. Our minds are hungry. We read, we study, we live, we do. And that's equivalent to the leaves. If you eat the proper leaves, if you do the proper thing, you will spin the proper Sa. In that Sa, what was once an earthbound creature melts, transforms itself into a flight-bound entity, and rises up as the bar bird, the Bennu, and rises up and joins into the heavens of the ancestral line. This is how deep our ancestors were. I love that story, but I want to talk to the person that thought that story up. That's the mind I want to talk to, because that mind doesn't think like our mind. That mind is a mind that doesn't get caught up in the material world, because if the caterpillar got caught up in the material world, it would never have time to eat the proper leaves.
And what does Ptah mean? So Ptah means heaven and earth, and that is expressed in the name itself. When the name is broken apart, you get Pet and you get Ta. Pet means heaven, and Ta means earth. So Ptah means heaven and earth, which is actually a hekal, a word of power. And if chanted resolutely and with feeling and with devotional reverence, what happens is that the chanting the name Ptah, Ptah, Ptah can lead you to the essence of heaven and earth. And the term pet ends in T and the term Ta begins in T. So the T sound is what binds these two together. So the T is actually the subtle essence that keeps heaven and earth together. And that we call, that would be Shu. And so you have here, which is the goddess Nut, heavens, Shu is the ear, and the god Geb is the earth. And actually Nut is the pet, and Geb is the Ta. So Nut and Geb are Ptah, actually. So Ptah, Nut is a form of Ptah, and Geb is a form of Ptah. A demarcated form, meaning it expresses the duality of time and space. And that time and space is maintained by Shu. So the Shu is actually the T sound. And that's some insight into the name Ptah and the divinity that we'll be discussing.
There will be a test. The guy just said you take 15 minutes.
Question: is the Memphite theology a scientific cosmology or a mythological religious cosmology? Answer: both. The Memphite theology can be considered a spiritual science. The Memphite theology was part of the esoteric religious theology and mythology of the ancient Egyptians, and the Memphite theology also shares many similarities with our modern scientific Big Bang theory of cosmology. Now, let's compare the Big Bang theory of cosmology to the Memphite theology of cosmology. In the Big Bang theory, you have that primordial abyss, the point where it's very hot and dense and begins to expand. That energy is then converted into subatomic particles, quarks and electrons. From the subatomic particles, atoms are formed, and from the atoms, stars and on to planets, galaxies, etc. In the Memphite theology, we have the primordial abyss, from which Ptah rises as the primordial mound, who then emits Atum, or light, who then goes on to create 8 other beings to form the Ennead. We see how these two concepts, the Big Bang theory and the Memphite theology, line up exactly in terms of their function. In the lotus variant, Ptah is replaced by the lotus flower, which rises from the primordial abyss. It opens up to give birth to Atum, or light, and Atum goes on to create the other 8 Ennead. Question: how is it that this ancient Memphite theology so closely matches our modern scientific theory? Answer: in his book, Stolen Legacy, Dr. George G.M. James suggests that the ancient Greeks stole their knowledge of observational astronomy, i.e. the nebular hypothesis, and particle physics, i.e. the atom, from the ancient Egyptian Memphite theology. The ancient Greeks are considered the originators of modern Western science, and thus, this would explain why the Big Bang theory so closely matches the Memphite theology. Ancient Egypt as the origin of Greek philosophy was also championed by Dr. Martin Bernal in his 3-volume work, Black Athena. Other scholars such as Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop promote a communicational or diffusionist hypothesis, suggesting that the ancient Greeks did not steal their knowledge from ancient Egypt, but rather the ancient Greeks were merely influenced by the ancient Egyptians.